This video is going to show you how to change the oil in a Fox Talas fork. Fox recommends changing your oil about every 30 hours, which is a little bit excessive. I usually go about every 50, 60 hours. And if you ride your bike about 5 hours a week, you're changing your oil every couple months. So it's really not that hard. I'm just going to show you some steps of how to get this done. So this is most of what you're going to need to do this. You're going to need the 10-weight green Fox suspension fluid. You're going to need the Fox float fluid. You're going to need to have at least 2 crush washers. Sometimes you have to change the crush washers when you do this, sometimes you don't, but you need to have 2 on hand just in case they both get damaged. And you're going to need a 26mm socket wrench, a 10mm socket wrench, a 2mm Allen wrench or hex wrench, and a 1/16 millimeter Allen wrench or hex wrench. Okay, before you remove the fork from the bike, you're going to want to loosen this top cap, and this is a trick that I've learned to keep from stripping this top cap. So on the Talas fork, what we're going to do is we're going to remove this adjuster knob by loosening these bolts with the 1/16 Allen wrench. I'm going to pull these out and set them aside. I'm also going to take out the valve cover here, and this valve cover is actually easier to take out if the fork is set in the lower Talas settings. So I'm going to take this bolt off, this cap off, and then I'm going to loosen these screws and just lift off the adjuster knob. And these screws are really small, so make sure you don't drop them. So that just lifts right off. What you're going to want to do is put your 26mm socket wrench on the bolt here. And again, don't try to do this off the bike, because you want to be able to push down on this socket wrench pretty hard to keep pressure on this bolt, because this is a really short bolt and it's really easy to strip it if you try to do this off the bike. So again, do this before you take the fork off, push it down, and what we're going to do is we're just going to loosen it a little bit so that when we do put the fork in a work stand, it'll be easy to get this bolt off. So what I've done, I've just loosened it maybe 1/4 of a turn. I'm also just going to let a little bit of air out. And now it's time to take the fork off the bike. Okay, so I've put the bike in a work stand after loosening that bolt on the top, and I've taken the wheel off. So now I'm just going to undo my cable guide here. And I'm not going to really go into detail about how to take a fork off, because I'm going to assume that if you're doing this, you probably have already taken your fork off before. And I'm going to undo the bolts that hold the brake caliper on. And one trick that you can do, because there's some spacer stacks on these bolts, is take something like a piece of duct tape, or I'm going to use just a wire tie here, a twist tie, and just that way you can hold this stack together without having to piece it back together when you're done and when you put the bike back together. Okay, so obviously you're just going to undo your pinch bolts on your stem. Always loosen and tighten pinch bolts on a stem evenly. And undo the top cap, and when you're undoing your top cap, obviously you want to put a hand on your fork so that in case it drops out, your hand's there to catch it. So just going to go ahead and remove my top caps, set those aside. Pull the stem off, pull out your spacers and your bearings, and obviously you have bearings on the top and bottom. Now we've got the fork off. And I'm just going to hang up the bike on a hook, and that way we can use the work stand for the fork. Okay, so I've just put my fork in the work stand. Makes this a lot easier to do. And the first thing I'm going to do is take my 2mm Allen wrench and undo the rebound adjuster knob here. There's a little indentation which you can see once I get this off where that bolt goes into. And remember, when you put this back on, you're gonna want the bolt to seat inside that indentation. You've got 2 bolts underneath the fork legs that take a 10mm socket wrench to get off. And so we're gonna remove these first. And most likely the oil will not drain out when these are removed, because we have to tap on the threads here to release the oil. But put a drain pan underneath just in case it comes out. But you're going to obviously need a drain pan when you tap on these threads to release the oil. So just take your 10mm, undo both of these bolts, and they should not be on there that tight. This is where your crush washers are going to be. They're going to be inside these bolts. And you can see that one stayed on. So I'm just going to remove that crush washer by twisting it. And this one looks to be, I'm going to replace this one. Some of the nylon's coming off. And I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Okay, so I realized when I got this one off, this bolt, on the air spring side on this Talas fork, which is a 2012, it's actually a metal washer, so I don't need to replace this one. Just one crush washer is what I need for this job. So now we're going to release the oil by tapping on the threads. But before you do that, you want to thread these bolts back on. Actually, on the air spring side, I'm not going to do this. We're going to do it on the rebound side, because you do not want to damage. Let me get over here so you can get a better angle of it. You do not want to damage this extension underneath the rebound. We got some oil coming out on the other side. So I'm going to thread this bolt back on upside down, so when we tap on this with a hammer, there is no damage to this protrusion where the rebound knob goes. I've got that on. I'm going to get a hammer and I'm going to tap it. Okay, so we've got this bolt threaded back on upside down to protect the rebound bolt down here. And I'm going to take, I use a metal hammer. Fox recommends a plastic mallet, which I don't have, so I just have to be really gentle and tap on this with a metal hammer. And this is going to be seated in there pretty good. So sometimes it takes a pretty good tap. And when I do that, it kind of pushes the threads back up in there and the oil can start to come out. Got to push that up a little bit. And we've got oil dripping out into my drain pan. And I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. And this one actually is already released. Okay, at this point, I'm going to drop the lowers off the fork. Okay, so to drop the lowers, all I'm going to do is pull them down. You're going to get some more oil come out, so make sure you keep this over your drain pan. There, the lowers are removed, and we're going to clean these out a little bit, just with a paper towel or a rag and some isopropyl alcohol. Okay, this is where you want to look at your seals and make sure they're not damaged. These are very easy to replace. Obviously you have to purchase them in advance, so it's probably not a bad idea to go ahead and have some seals on hand. I don't, but this fork is not that old, so I don't expect there to be any problems. And as I look in here, just a little bit of dirt, but the seals are in great condition. So now I'm just going to take I'm going to use a paper towel. You can use a shop rag that's clean. Make sure it's clean. And some just some isopropyl rubbing alcohol. And I'm just going to kind of clean around the seals. Just clean off any dirt that's maybe hard to get to when you just generally wash your bike. And then we'll move on to the next step. Okay, so at this point I've got the fork in the work stand with the lowers removed. And I'm just going to let the remaining air out. We let a little bit of air out back when we loosened this bolt. And then the next thing that you're going to do is you're going to use either a dental pick or a flat blade screwdriver. And I didn't go over those tools in the beginning, but you're also going to need something. There's just a little spiral retaining ring right here that you're going to need to just pop out. And this is kind of what separates the Talas from, let's say, just a basic float. On the float, you're not going to have to remove this this internal Talas system. It's very simple, but the main thing you really got to do is just pop out this spiral retaining ring, which again I'm going to use a dental pick, or you can use a really thin flat blade screwdriver. Okay, so I'll try to get the camera angle where you can see this, but you just find the end of the spiral retaining ring and use your pick or flat blade screwdriver, and all you got to do is just pull it out, and that's what it looks like. Okay, so now we're just going to pull up, and this is just basically the Talas adjustment system. It's got a spring here. We're just going to pull this off so we don't lose it. And now we're going to set this aside. Now it goes without saying that you want to set everything on a very clean surface. I usually lay out some paper towels. And we're going to get my socket wrench. It's a little too hard to turn by hand. So this is the rest of the top cap assembly. And we're just going to undo the top cap. Okay, so once you get the top cap loose, you can lift straight up on this assembly. And that comes out. Okay, so now I'm going to just real quick take the fork out of the work stand, and there's this Talas assembly at the bottom, and we're just going to take this out. And make sure when you turn this fork upside down that you've got it over the drain pan, because the float fluid will come out at this point. Okay, so I'm just taking something like a socket wrench that's pretty blunt on the end, and I'm just pushing this lower Talas assembly, as it's called, out through the top of the fork. And just pull it out, and now all we're going to do is check the seals and just put some float fluid on to lube it.